Before we start, let's just have a little bit of a few administrative matters. Please make sure your phones are turned off. I've just turned off mine. I've also got an announcement to make from the FCCJ. Let me quote, "For the journalists whose targeted audience is in Japan, please be aware of the Public Office Election Act, or Koshoku Senkyu Ho. We have no intention of favoring one candidate over another, and we are trying to invite as many candidates as possible, but there's a limit to what we can do. We thank you for your understanding and cooperation." I was asked to kick off proceedings by asking Mr. Ozawa a few questions, so let me start by asking him what is his evaluation of the Abe administration and what are the policies of the Life Party in the upcoming election.
私の方から最初に、小沢様に質問するようにというふうに、指示されております。アベノミクスあるいは安倍政権の今までをどう評価されますでしょうか。そして今回の選挙にあたりまして、生活の党は何を、訴えたいというふうに思いますのでしょうか。
腰掛けて喋らせていただきますのでお許しください。
So I ask for your indulgence. I would like to sit while I speak today.
今回の選挙につきましては、安倍さんはアベノミクスの是非を問う選挙だと言っております。
As you know, in this upcoming election, Mr. Abe has said that this election will be about a verdict on Abenomics, whether you're in favor of it or are against it.
アベノミクスというのはどういう政策内容を持っているのか、私にもよく分かりませんけれども、いずれにしてもまずその結果を検証する必要があると思います。
What exactly is Abenomics? What is it comprised of? I frankly am not quite certain that I understand everything about it. However, what I can say is that it is important to look at the results of Abenomics so far.
まずは株が上がりました。今日も上がったのかな。それは事実でありますが、この株が上がったということによって、大きな利益を得た人はほんの少数一握りの人だろうと思います。
One of the things that we've seen from Abenomics is that stock prices have risen. In fact, I think they've risen a little bit today as well. That is an undeniable fact. However, again, when we look at the results, the fact that stock prices have risen have given profits to only a handful of people.
超金融緩和で、為替が円が非常に安くなりました。
Of course, because of great quantitative easing, monetary policy, we have seen the currency rates change dramatically. The yen has fallen.
これによって、利益を得たのは輸出を大量にしている大きな大企業でありまして、空前の利益を上げたと言っております。
With the low yen, the profits again have been gained by very, very large companies which depend primarily on exports. Some of these corporations, these large corporations, are seeing unprecedented profits.
安倍さんの考えは強い企業をどんどん大きくして、そこでいっぱい儲けてもらって、その利益を配分すれば国民皆さんも豊かになる、こういうことで、あります。
Prime Minister Abe's thinking seems to be this way. He thinks that he should promote policies that will make strong companies stronger, allow them to become bigger and make lots of profits, and these profits can then be redistributed to the average citizen, making their lives more wealthy as well.
しかしその利益は従業員の人にもほとんど還元されておりません。もちろん特定の大企業の正社員については2% ばかし上がりましたけれども、その他の95、6% の勤労者はこの先日も発表されましたように実質所得は減っております。
However, most of these profits that have been made by these large corporations have not really been distributed even to the employees of these large companies. There are, of course, I should qualify this, there are a certain handful of very, very large companies whose regular full-time employees have seen a slight increase in their wages of about 2%. However, for the rest of the workers, some 95 to 96% of the workers in Japan, recently there were figures announced, but the actual real income of these workers have fallen.
また大企業を支えております下請けの中小零細企業は従来も消費税さえも負担できないという企業が2割を超えてましたけれども、また消費税のアップで大変苦しい状況だと思いますが、いずれにしてもその下請けに対しましても仕入れ原価を削減するということを徹底することによって何の恩恵ももたらしていないということだと思います。
Also, when we look at these very large corporations that are making these unprecedented profits, we see that underneath them there are many, many small and medium enterprises that act as their suppliers. And these are smaller enterprises that had trouble dealing with absorbing the increase in the consumption tax. There were some 20% of these small and medium enterprises that said that they could not really bear the costs of this raise in the consumption tax. Their situation was very dire to begin with, and yet in the current environment we see that these companies are being forced to actually lower their costs of goods, which they then they sell to the larger corporations. In other words, these small and medium enterprises that support these large corporations are not seeing any benefits from Abenomics.
さらに政府は率先して今 40% になんなんとしているこの非正規の社員をもっともっと増やそうと、それによって企業の人件費コストを減らすということになりますが、そういう方向で進んでおります。
And something that makes me even more concerned is the fact that the government is now proceeding with policies to try to increase the numbers of persons, workers who are working as irregular employees. Their numbers are already over 40% of the total working population. However, the government is encouraging more workers to become irregular workers. In this way, these large companies will be able to hold down their personnel costs even more.
非正規の社員が収入も正規社員に比べて低いですし、またその身分が安定しない、いつ解雇されるかクビになるかわからないという状況になるわけです。
Obviously, it is a very difficult situation if you are an irregular worker. Not only are your incomes much lower than those of full-time regular employees, but your working situation is very unstable. You have no idea when you might possibly be fired.
これでは働く勤労者の特に若い人たちの将来の生活も安定しませんし、収入も低いと、こういうことになりまして、最近若い人が結婚できないとか、結婚しても子供を産み育てられないとかという声が非常に多く上がって、います。それはこういう政府の雇用政策が大きく影響していると思います。
Given such a background, many workers, especially young workers, find it difficult to find hope for the future. As a result, they find that they have no idea how much income they will be able to have in the future. They cannot plan a stable future. As a result, I hear many voices that young persons are afraid to, for example, get married, or even if they marry, to have children because they do not know what the future might hold. In other words, this very difficult situation that workers, especially young workers, are facing, I think is the direct result of government policies.
それから大多数の一般国民にとりましては、為替のが安くなっているということは輸入価格が上がることでありまして、物価が非常に上がってきていると。ところが今言ったことも含めて、 実質賃金、実質収入は減少しているということで、あると思います。
Also, for the majority of the population, these currency fluctuations are acting in a very negative way because as the yen falls, it means that the prices of imported goods becomes higher. In other words, the price, CPI, consumer prices go up. And given the fact, as I mentioned before, that at the same time, real wages or real incomes are falling, this creates a doubly difficult situation for the average person.
アベノミクスで経済を活性化させ景気を良くするということですが、 GDP の6割以上は個人消費です。アメリカでは7割以上と言われておりますけれども、ですから個人の生活を安定させ収入を増やす方策を考えなければ個人消費が増えるわけはない。個人消費が増えない限りは景気も良くならないということだろうと思います。
The purpose of Abenomics is to somehow stimulate or revitalize the economy. However, what is important to remember is that of the GDP, 60% of Japan's GDP depends on individual consumption. The number is higher in the United States. We've heard that about over 70% of the U.S. GDP relies on individual consumption. So obviously what is needed is to have stability in the lives of the average person, ensure that the incomes of the average person rises. Otherwise, individual spending will not rise. The economy, the GDP, the economy will not grow.
こういった企業サイドに偏った自由競争優先の考え方の下では主に都会の勤労者の人も今のような状況ですし、また地方の農林漁業を基盤とした地域は非常に格差が大きくなり衰退の方向に進んでおります。
In other words, many of these policies that have been promoted by the Abe administration seem to be standing on the side of these large corporations, a handful of large corporations. Basically, these policies seem to be based on the idea of allowing a free competition, market competition. However, the results, as I've been describing, are very difficult. Even if you live in the big cities, if you are an average worker and living in metropolises, life is still very difficult. And if you go out into the local regions, people who are involved in agriculture, fishing, or in the wood industry, they find that wealth disparity is growing throughout the nation, and many areas are actually deteriorating.
我々は自由競争を否定しておりませんし、企業が儲けることを何ら否定しておりません。
I would like to be very, very clear. We have nothing against, and we are not denying the necessity of having a free competition, free market competition, and we are not denying that corporations have a right to seek profits.
ただ、自由競争を強調すれば、初期の資本主義と同じことになってしまいます。
What we are saying, however, is that if you put too much emphasis on allowing a free competition, you find yourself in a situation where you have market fundamentalism, but a market fundamentalism of olden times.
先人はこの初期資本主義の状況からこれでは国家社会自体が危ういという考え方の下でいろいろなセーフティーネットを考えてきたわけです。年金、医療等々に始まってそういうことで資本主義は民主主義は生き延びて今日に来たと思います。
In other words, our predecessors worked very, very hard to try to alleviate or mitigate some of the negative aspects of having unfettered capitalism. In other words, they saw that if there was absolutely no way to protect the weaker in society, then both nations and societies might find themselves in danger. As a result, our predecessors were wise and created different kinds of safety nets, whether we're talking about medical services, whether we're talking about pension systems, etc. etc. It is as a result of this combination of safety nets and capitalism that we have seen this capitalistic society continue until today.
ですから私たちは雇用の分野でもあるいはもちろん年金医療介護との社会保障の分野もそうですが食料自給という観点から見て私は農業漁業等にも一定のセーフティーネットをきちんとこれを作るということによって国民の生活を安定化させることが大事だと思います。
So again, when I'm talking about whether I'm talking about employment, whether I'm talking about the other safety nets that we need in society, pension systems, medical systems, nursing care systems, all these social security services. Also, I might add that from a self-sufficiency point of view, in other words, for Japan to be able to produce enough of the food that it consumes, I believe it is very necessary to look at the agricultural sector, the fishing sector, and provide a certain level of safety nets in that area, in these areas. This will also help to increase employment, and this will also help to stabilize the lives of the average citizen.
結論を申し上げれば、アベノミクスは自由競争を優先させる。それによって私はその結果は国民生活を破壊し、そして国の将来を誤るものだとそう思っております。ですから今回の争点は、ちょっと長ったらしくなりましたけれども、国民の生活を第一として考えていくか、あるいは安倍さんの言うようにとにかく強いところをどんどん伸ばしていくと、一般国民の生活はその後だという考え方で経済政策を進めていくか、理屈を言うとそういうところが争点だと思います。
So, to give my conclusion, I believe that Abenomics has basically been a set of policies designed to prioritize free competition in the markets. And as I've described at some length already, and I apologize for taking up so much time, I think the results have been that the lives of average citizens have been almost destroyed. And I think that the future of our nation has been put in great peril or danger. And so if I were to summarize what I think the biggest campaign theme for this current election might be is, are you going to choose between putting people's lives first, or are you going to choose economic policies as espoused by Prime Minister Abe and worry basically about supporting large organizations, large corporations, and then thinking about the everyday lives of the average person.
以上です。
Thank you for your attention.
Thank you very much. Can I just ask one quick question? That was a presentation which was very heavy in economics. You didn't really mention anything about Abe's sort of political views and foreign policy views. Would you like to say something about that?
ありがとうございます。付け加えさせていただけますでしょうか。今までその安倍首相の経済政策についていろいろコメントをしていただいたんでございますが、その外交政策などについて、あるいはその外国との関係について何もお話をされてないんですが、あるいは政治的思想についても話してないんでございますが、どうお考えでしょうか。
安倍さんの政治的な思想といいますか、考え方を簡単に言いますと、ごく分かりやすく言えば戦後体制に疑問を投げかけている、あるいは否定している、否定するということになると思います。
If I were to describe Prime Minister Abe's political thinking, if I were to summarize it in a very simple way, I think he is basically throwing doubt, questions about to the post-war system that we have had in Japan for many, many decades.
ですからいつも問題になりますが、歴史認識についても、あるいは極東軍事裁判の点につきましても、安倍さんは常に曖昧な言葉で答えを濁しています。
For example, when we think about his political views, the thing that immediately comes to mind is his awareness of history and how he views historical matters. Whenever sensitive subjects, sensitive for himself, come up, whether we're talking about the Tokyo tribunals or other historical related questions, he tends to, the literal translation would be to speak in very vague terms, to sort of fudge the issue and not come out in a very direct way.
ですから安倍さんがこういう政治的なスタンスを取っている限り、日中と日韓は解決することは非常に難しいと思いますし、特にまた日米関係についてもマイナスの影響を及ぼすと私は心配しております。
So I am quite concerned, and I believe that as long as Prime Minister Abe continues to hold these positions and maintains these kinds of political stances, I believe that it will be very, very difficult to resolve the difficulties in the relationship between Japan and South Korea and Japan and China. In fact, even when we look at the Japan-U.S. relationship, I believe that his views are presenting a negative impact or giving a negative impact to that relationship. That is something that concerns me.
Thanks very much. Now let's go to the Q&A. Working press first. Raise your hands. Because I'm a bit blinded. Let's go for Pio and then Anthony and then Siegfried and then.
Good afternoon. Welcome back to the Foreign Correspondent Club. I also share with the moderator the regret that you couldn't become Prime Minister of Japan a few times that you tried. You were very close, but well, I think you should have had a chance, but this is my very personal opinion. Now, I'm from Italy, and besides sharing the fact that we are both countries in recession, Italy and Japan, we should congratulate ourselves, we also have a very strange political representation system. We, both countries, are running a parliament under an electoral system that has been ruled unconstitutional by our Supreme Court. And you are one of the responsible of this, because you are the one that made the last important electoral reform before Hosokawa, remember. So, what is, in your opinion, apart of the result of the elections, a democratic country like Japan that gives 79% of the representation seats in the parliament, 79%, with 43% of the vote, and where the lower chamber vote has a difference of 2.3 and the Sangin a difference of 4.7 between the votes. Now, the Supreme Court has ruled this unconstitutional 3 times, so it did in Korea once, and in Italy 2 times. But nothing happens. How you, as a leader that knows very well China and is kind of befriending with China, would consider we countries, democratic countries, giving lectures to China about democratic process while we are running on a legitimate electoral system?
すみません、イタリアの記者でございます。私は小沢さん司会者と同じ気持ちだと思うのでございますが、小沢様が一回首相になってもらいたかった、と思う一人でございます。私の質問でございますが、イタリアは日本と、共通点がいくつかあるのでございますが、一つは景気後退という状態にもあるんですけど、それより重要なことは、いわゆるその選挙、についてのその票の状態ということですね。つまりその、両国におきまして最高裁が、過去の選挙の結果が違法状態というその結論を出しているわけでございます。ちょっと Do you want me to translate all of it?
I think he knows.
Yeah, okay.
Just tell him that I consider him responsible for this, so he should do so.
はい、細かいお話をちょっと別としまして、一票の格差の問題がずっと続いているということでございますし、また、小沢様はその中国の首脳とも近いのではないかと思いますが、イタリアあるいは韓国あるいはその日本は各国においてその 最高裁が違憲状態というような結果を出しててにもかかわらずそれを是正してないというような、その状態があるわけですが、そういう民主主義国家というふうにその主張している国々が、中国にいろいろ民主主義についていろいろレクチャーできるのかという、その質問が一つあります。そしてまた、この、違憲状態を、作り上げた、そのプロセスにも関わったというふうに思いますので、この状態をどう思いますでしょうか。
簡単に言うと定数の是正一票の格差ということだろうと思います。
I think what you're basically asking is, what about fixing the number of seats and also reducing the number of seats in the parliament and also the vote disparity issue?
一票は何倍が適正かどうかは別にして可能な限り平等にしなくてはいけないと思っております。
My fundamental thinking is that regardless of what numbers you put, how far you can go in having vote disparity, how many votes to one vote, I think fundamentally the most important principle is you should try to get that number as close to 1 as possible.
今日本では衆議院では2倍ということが一つの目安になってますけれども、いずれにしてもこれは政党に任せているとなかなか実現できないと思います。ですから確かこれはアメリカの下院だったかな、4年か5年でもって、日本でいや国勢調査かな、人口移動でもって、第三者機関がもう強制的に選挙区の線引きをやるというシステムになっていたと記憶しております。ですから日本の場合は5年に一遍の国勢調査ありますので、同じようにですね、その国勢調査の人口に応じて第三者機関、これは裁判所でもどこでもいいですけれども選挙区の区割りを変えるということにまずするべきだと思います。
In Japan, as you've pointed out, in the House of Representatives, one target figure is that you can have vote disparity as high as 2-1, and that might be acceptable. However, I believe this is not an issue that can ever be resolved by the political parties themselves. It has to be done by an outside force. I think what happened with the House of Representatives in the United States was that over a period of 4 or 5 years, whenever there was a census that was done, then a third-party independent organization was established to redraw the district lines so that you would have less vote disparity. And I think since Japan also has a national census every 5 years, we could have another organization, an outside organization. It could be the courts, it could be something else, but they again should redraw the electoral district lines.
参議院の場合は他の国でも衆議院とは性格の違う位置づけをしております。日本でも本来そうすべきだったと思いますけれども、今は憲法上は衆議院と同じような性格付けになっておりますので、同様に一票の格差の問題が生じております。
In regard to the House of Councilors, in other words, the upper house, in many other nations, the upper house is treated differently from the lower house. In other words, it is considered to be a slightly different nature. And I think that might have been a good system for Japan. However, when the Constitution was established in Japan, the House of Councilors and the House of Representatives, they are both built along the same lines. Therefore, as a result, I believe that the same kind of vote disparity issue remains for the House of Councilors as well, and something should also be done about that.
今参議院はそんなことも考えて裁判所は5倍かななんかの基準を一つ出してますけれども、最終的には僕は憲法を改正して参議院の性格付けを衆議院とは違ったものにするというのが一番いいと思ってます。
At present, as you pointed out, the House of Councillors, the vote disparity is allowed to almost 1-to-5 ratio by the courts. That seems to be one standard that is being more or less discussed. However, my final belief in regard to the House of Councillors, the upper house, is that the Constitution should be amended, and as with many other nations, the upper house should be of a different nature, different characteristic from the House of Representatives.
Okay, thank you very much. Let's go to Anthony Rowley.
Anthony Rowley, Singapore Business Times. Let me add my welcome, if I may. As you pointed out, Ozawa-san, there are some real question marks against Abenomics and also against some of Mr. Abe's other policies, reinterpretation of the Constitution, Official Secrets Act, and tensions with neighbours and so on. But there doesn't seem to be any strong voice in the opposition that's making these points. The opposition seems very timid. If that is the case, and if you agree, how much can the opposition hope to gain by way of votes in this election, and how much do you think your party can hope to gain if you're one of the few strong voices?
はい、シンガポールビジネスタイムズでございます。先ほどそのアベノミクスのについての疑問点をいろいろ取り上げました。そしてまた他のその安倍首相の問題点、例えばその憲法の解釈、あるいはその秘密保護法の件、あるいはその外交政策についていろいろご指摘はされたんでございます。しかしながら今までその国会の運営を見ておりますと、野党からこういう点についてあんまり大きな声が出てないと我々は感じているわけでございます。こういう状態でございますと、野党はどうやってこの今の選挙で大きく躍進できると思いますでしょうか。そして、生活の党自身も、どれぐらいその、躍進できる、と思いますでしょうか。
野党が何党だ何党だ俺の党だ他人の党だそういうことを言っている限り政権は取れないと思います。
Unfortunately, I think that as long as the opposition parties are always talking about my party, my party, my party, their own different parties, they will not ever be able to get in the reins of administration.
ですから私はこのまんまの状態が仮に続くとすればまさに新55年体制ではないかということをちょっと言ったことがあります。
In other words, if they are never able to pull together to gain the reins of power again, then I think this situation, current situation we are seeing will continue for some time. In fact, recently I've been talking publicly about this new situation being a new, what we call 1955 system, referring to the system that was political system that was established around 1955 in Japan and that continued for many, many decades. I think we're having a new version of that now.
しかし、今の安倍内閣、自民党内閣に、非常に、不満を持ち、批判をしている人たちは大変国民の中に多いと思います。
Having said that, however, I believe that there are many, many people within the population of Japan who are very dissatisfied with the Abe cabinet, with the LDP-led cabinet, and who are very critical.
ですから私もずっと言い続けてきたんですけれども、大きな基本の問題の一致はもちろん必要ですけれども、自民党に代わる野党の政権担当できる受け皿をみんなで力を合わせて一つの受け皿を作れば、例えばこの選挙でも私は国民は安倍政権ではなく野党の統一体を選んだと思います。
So this is something that I've been saying for a very, very long time, and I continue to say this throughout my career, that I believe that, of course, you must agree on fundamental issues, but having agreed on these fundamental issues, what we have to do as opposition parties is that we must come together. We must be able to create an option. A vessel is the literal word that is being used. A vessel that can be viewed by the public as being an alternative to the LDP-centric administrations we have seen in the past. In other words, we have to present an option to the public so that they can choose another group that will take the reins of power and act responsibly.
残念ながら今回はできませんでしたので、新聞テレビで報道されるようなことに当然の結果として、なるんだろうと思います。
I felt actually that this kind of coming together of these opposition parties could, and presenting an option to the Japanese public, could have been done even in this current election. However, unfortunately, this was not able to be realized. And as a result, I am very sad to say that the predictions, the election predictions, election results predictions that we're seeing in the newspapers and media probably, unfortunately, will come true.
What about your own party in terms of seats?
生活の党は議席数どれぐらい確保したいと。
いや、それはもう候補者全員当選を願ってます。
Of course, we're trying to get all of our candidates to win.
Siegfried, then
Siegfried Knittel, freelancer from Germany. The last polls showed that Chimindo, even the public is not satisfied with the policy of the Chimindo. Chimindo will win perhaps more votes, more seats in the parliament than in the last election. What's your strategy to counter this thinking in the public?
ドイツのフリーのものでございます。最近の世論調査によりますと、自民党は前回より多くの議席を確保するのではないかというふうに言われております。こういう状況の中ではどのような戦略をこれから展開されるのでしょうか。
ですからそれは今申し上げましたように、きちんと野党の各党が一体となって、受け皿を作れたら必ず私は政権交代が可能だったと思いますけれども、それができなかった。結局それぞれの各党で個別に戦う以外ないという現状ですので、それを大幅に打開する方法はなかなか難しいと思います。
It basically goes back to what I was saying earlier. Unfortunately, I thought there would have been a possibility for the opposition parties to overcome their differences and come together and provide an option, a united option for the voters in this election. And if the opposition parties had been able to do that, then I think we would have been able to regain the reins of power. However, as I mentioned earlier, unfortunately, this time the individual parties decided to focus on their own political parties. As a result, we can only continue to fight our individual battles.
let's go to Siegfried, and then we'll go to the gentleman. Oh, sorry. Yes, you. Sorry, and then Jérôme.
Daniel Leusink, het Financiële Dagblad, the financial daily from the Netherlands, Holland. 20 years ago, in 1994, you wrote the book Nihon Kaizo Keikaku, where the moderator also referred to. In English, the blueprint for a new Japan. There is a copy of the book in the library of FCCJ. But since publishing that book, the Japanese economy has slipped into stagnation and it has built up an unprecedented national debt. So now the government is trying to revive the economy with equally unprecedented fiscal and monetary stimulus. Do you have any plans to write a new book? And if I may ask, how big is the risk that Japan will default on its national debt?
はい、オランダの、金融、新聞のものでございます。1994年に本を書かれたわけでございます。日本改造、計画 ございますでしょうか。コピーも我が、図書館の方にも、あります。それを書かれてから日本の経済はどんどん停滞、してきたわけでございますし、また国と地方の債務がどんどん膨張してきているわけでございます。それにより今はアベノミクスという、今までなかったような刺激策でいろいろこれに対応しようとしているわけでございます。今の現状を見まして新しい本をお書きになる、計画お考えはありますでしょうか。そしてまた、これも非常に大きな質問なんでございますが、日本がその債務不履行に陥るというその可能性、このリスクはどのくらいあると思いますでしょうか。
私が日本改造計画を世に出しましたときに、私は日本の霞が関のいわゆる行政、国の統治、霞が関支配、これ自体をやはり根本的に変えないといけないだろうという個々の政策の前提として考えておりました。
When I wrote this book, The Blueprint for New Japan, my fundamental thinking was that we had to fundamentally release Japan or free Japan from the control of the Kasumigaseki bureaucrats, in other words, the government administrators, the government, the organizations that basically governed and dominated Japan. It was on the basis that we would be able to free ourselves of their control that I presented various policies.
これは短期間で言えば戦後ずっとますます強大になった官僚機構ですし、長く言えば明治以来の行政の機構ですから、そう簡単には転換大改革というのはできないんですけれども、その考え方としては今なお私はそれをやらなければ根本的な日本の体質にメスを入れることはできないと、そう思っています。
Of course, if you look at this bureaucracy and this governing structure that we have in Japan that is very centralized, over the short term, you can say that it has been in effect and it has been controlling Japan since after World War II. However, if you take it even longer look back into history, this organization, administrative bureaucracy, has been in power of Japan since the Meiji Restoration in 1868. In other words, it is a very, very strong and deep-rooted structure that you cannot reform and change so easily. Having said this, however, my fundamental thinking is the same. Unless we somehow are able to extricate ourselves from the control of this organization, this structure, Japan will not be able to fundamentally solve many of its problems.
ただそう言っても私は官僚を否定しているわけではありません。ただ特に国の官僚は国家的なレベルでもって考え、そして仕事をすべきだと。国会議員もやはり同様に国家レベルのことでそれを前提として活動しなくては、政治活動しなくてはいけない、そういう意味で申し上げているだけです。
But I would also like to clarify my views. I'm not denying the importance of the bureaucracy. I believe that, especially on a national level, the bureaucracy, the Kasumigaseki bureaucrats must think about national level problems and they must work for the national interest. And I think the same can be said for Diet members as well. They should have a broad view of the future of the country and they should conduct their political work accordingly.
その意味で、予算も地方に関係することは、これは医療や介護なんかもほとんどその地方の役割がなんですけれども、年金は別としてもいろんな問題につきましては地方に全部お金もやり権限もやり、そして地方の知恵と努力によってやらせるべきである。その中から大変な大きな無駄を省くことができると。今補助金や政策経費でもって50兆円から60兆円の予算があります。ですから今言った地方のことは地方へと いう形で大改革をするならば、そこから2割ないし3割の無駄を省くことができると、それは一挙両得だと、そのように思います。
However, I also believe that the bureaucrats should focus on national issues and leave regional issues to regional areas. Specifically, certainly the pension system might be a national issue, but when we talk about medical services, when we talk about nursing care services, these are things that are very, very closely related to each individual locale and local governments. And therefore, I believe strongly that both the revenues, the monies that are needed to implement these policies and services, and the authority to use these monies and implement policies should be given to the local areas. In that way, we would also be able to eliminate a great deal of waste. At present, these kinds of subsidies and policy-related expenditures amount to 50 to 60 trillion yen per year. I believe that if we leave things up to the regional areas and have a tremendous reform and give both sources of money and authority to the regional areas, we will be able to reduce wasteful spending by 20 to 30%.
でもちろん中央の政府についてはスリムにすることなんですけれども、しかしそれと同時にですね、日本は憲法以下どの行政法律にも行政にも危機管理非常事態のシステムは全くありません。その一時を取ってみてもスリムではあるけれども強力な中央政府を私はイメージしております。
At the same time, I believe that what is needed is to ensure that the central government, first of all, becomes slimmed down. We eliminate wasteful spending. We give a great deal of authority and monies to the regional areas. It will be slimmed down, but at the same time, it must serve also an important new function. What I mean by this is that in the Constitution and in existing administrative directives and in existing laws, there is basically no phrase or statement talking about crisis management. And I think that is a role where the central, slimmed-down central government can play an important role.
それからそうだ忘れた本については次の続編を書こうと思って、原稿はかなり書いてますけれども、今まだ出版するタイミングでないので、そのままにしております。それから何だっけ最後の日本の国家が財政が債務不履行というのを恐れないかということですが、これは当分私は日本のは大丈夫だと思います。というのは国府としてかなり年金であれ何であれいっぱいゆうちょであれ何でありますので、日本の国の財産というのはまだありますから、このまんまずるずる何十年も続けていけば別ですけれども、当面債務不履行に陥るなどということはありえないと思います。
So in regard to your question about the book, yes, I've been working on a sequel for some time, and I write from time to time, but I have not found the exact time to yet publish it. And in regard to your last question about the risk of Japan falling into, not being able to repay its debts, I think for the time being, there are no such worries. Certainly we do have a great deal of national and regional debt, but we also have, when we look at our pension system, when we look at our postal savings, etc., Japan has a great deal of assets as well. So certainly if this current situation continues for decades and decades and decades, that might be a true concern. But for the immediate or near time being, I cannot think that Japan will ever fall into that kind of situation.
予算、財政のが非常に硬直化してしまいますので、これは借金はできるだけ減らす努力はしなくてはいけないと思います。
Having said this, however, I do believe, I don't mean to take an easygoing view of things. We have to be very, very careful about how we prepare budgets from year to year. We must make sure that the fiscal situation is one where expenditures do not simply become fixed and permanent. We must make sure that we try to decrease our debt year by year.
Okay, thank you. Joel, and then the gentleman at the back. Let's keep our questions short because we're up to the 6:30 mark.
Hello, Joël Legendre from RTL France Broadcasting. Mr. Ozawa, in spite of what the surveys say, the people seem not to understand this election, why it has been decided so abruptly and in a way that you were not ready for that, actually. And from that, I mean, in spite of the fact that people seem not to understand this costly election, it appears that, in fact, the LDP is going to win. So I'd like to ask you some kind of question here. There is a contradiction in Japanese politics for decades and decades. Can you elaborate on that?
はい、恐縮ございます。最近の世論調査ではいろんな予測が出ているんでございますが、やっぱり多くの世論調査を見ますと、第一なぜこんなに急にこの選挙が行われるかっていうのは多くの人たちはよく理解できない、という結果が出ております。理解できてないんですけれど、しかしながら自民党が圧勝するんじゃないかというような予測が出ております。これは非常に相反するような状況ではないかと思うんでございますが、でもこのような相反するような状況って過去にもあったかと思うんでございます。これについてなぜ日本人はこういうような相反するような状態が続くのかどうかについてご説明いただけますでしょうか。
日本人の意識というか、ある意味外国の皆さんにはちょっと理解できないかもしれません。例えば安倍さんの政治的なスタンス、あるいはアベノミクスと呼ばれるような経済政策でも私が指摘しましたように誰もいいと思ってないんですね。これも世論調査すると大部分の人がノーなんですね。ところが安倍内閣を支持するとかあるいは選挙はこれはさっき言ったように野党の責任が非常に大きいんですけれども、政権を代わって担当する政党がないというようなことで、自民党が結果的に勝つということなんですが、私はもっともっと日本人が積極的に自己主張し、その自分の考えに基づいて行動すると、これはもうずっと何十年も前から私言ってることですが、自立した個人個人にならないと日本の民主主義は定着しないということで、皆さんがちょっと疑問を持つということについて本当に私もそういうことを心配している一人です。
Yes, the thinking of the Japanese people might be a little difficult to understand for non-Japanese. If you look at the different opinion polls in regard to Prime Minister Abe's political stance, in regard to his Abenomics, as I've explained, the negative aspects of his economic policies, the majority of people are very much against. They are basically saying no to what Prime Minister Abe does and thinks. But at the same time, there is this contradiction in that the polls say they support the Abe administration. And of course, part of the reason lies in the fact, as I explained before, it is the responsibility of the opposition parties not to have been able to unite to present a real option to the electorate. However, and as a result, it seems that the LDP will probably win many seats. But it really goes back to a more fundamental question, and this is something that I've been saying for decades and decades and decades now. I believe, and I have hoped for many, many years, that the Japanese people as individuals will begin to speak up and say what they believe and also to act as they believe. In other words, to actually to take action. I've said for many, many years that unless Japanese individuals can become, if they cannot become autonomous and self-reliant, then you cannot have democracy truly take root in Japan. Since this has not yet seemed to happen, this is a cause of great concern to me still.
Thanks very much. Final question, gentleman in the glasses.
はい。デューク石川です。フリーランスです。14日の選挙ではちょっと届かないと思うんですが、小沢さん今72歳、80歳までやるとしても、80歳で早すぎますけどね、85でもやるとしても、あと2回は仕掛けるチャンスがあると思うんです。その時にこの間の2009年みたいなああいう興奮を日本国民に作れるかどうか、その余力がありますかどうか、それが質問です。 ありがとうございます。
My name is Ishikawa. I have a question. You're right now 72 years old. I think you can stay in politics at least until you're 80, maybe perhaps even to 85. That means that in the next decade or so, you might have at least 2 more chances to try to bring a great change to Japan. Do you feel that you have enough energy and stamina left within yourself to create the excitement that you created in the Japanese world in 2009?
まあ私今まであまりにもいろいろなことがありましたので、結構くたびれてますし年も取ってきましたので、そういうふうにご質問いただくと何と答えていいかわからないんですが、しかしながら私が長期政権の自民党を離党して、そして今日まである意味で苦労を重ねながら参りましたのは、何としても日本に議会制民主主義を定着させなければいけないと。そのためには少なくても二大政党、政権を担当しうる政党を最低2つは作らなければいけない。そういうことで政治が切磋琢磨して与党野党の中でより良い政治を目指していくと、まさにそれが民主主義の最大の機能だと思っておりまして、私はこれを生涯の目標にいたしておりますので、80まで85までやれるかどうかは別として、もうしばらくなんとかその実現を見るまでもう少し頑張りたいと思ってます。
Thank you for your question. As you know, in my career, so much has happened to me, and I'm frankly quite exhausted by much of what has happened to me, and I'm quite elderly. So whenever I'm given the kind of question that you just gave me, I really do not quite know how to respond. Having said this, however, I have spent a very, very long career with many, many trials and tribulations. I left the LDP, although it was in power for a very, very long time, and until now I have gone through so much difficulty over the past few decades. But the reason that I was able to do that was because I believe from the bottom of my heart that what is needed in Japan is a parliamentary democracy system that has truly taken root in this country. I believe that it is my lifelong goal and dream to see a true parliamentary democracy take root and be established in Japan. And in order to have a true working parliamentary democracy in Japan, you need at least a minimum of 2 parties that could both be responsible enough to govern the nation. It is only when you have at least two strong parties that are equally capable of taking the reins of power can you have the tensions that are necessary to ensure that better politics is produced for the nation. I think that is the most wonderful aspect, the greatest function of the democratic system. Again, this is my life goal, to see this democratic system be established in Japan. I don't know if I'll be able to continue to 80 to 85, but for the time being, I'm going to try to keep doing my best.
Thank you very much. If the audience could stay seated, I would like to give Mr. Ozawa an honorary membership to the Foreign Correspondents Club. We hope to see you in the bar where we can discuss your vision and wishing you the best of luck in the coming election.
はい、ありがとうございました。